Put the hose down, hands where I can see them. You're trespassing. That's what two armed HOA enforcers shouted at a black woman on her own lawn. No warrant, no real authority, just a badge-shaped patch and enough prejudice to fill a courtroom. What they didn't know, she was a former Delta Force operative and a 2000 IQ military lawyer. What happened next? Let's just say chess was played on a board they didn't even see. This isn't just another story of a racist cop. It's about what happens when ignorance meets unmatched intelligence. As Malcolm X once said, "You're not supposed to be so blind with patriotism that you can't face reality. Wrong is wrong, no matter who does it." If you believe in justice, in standing your ground with grace and fire, drop a comment, hit that like, and subscribe. Because stories like this, they don't just entertain, they awaken. The sun had just started to rise over Windmere Ridge, a pristine suburban neighborhood lined with white fences, glistening lawns and security cameras tucked discreetly under the eaves of every home. The air smelled of early morning dew and perfection, a place designed to feel safe, sanitized, and unmistakably exclusive. Simone Carter stood on the front lawn of her newly purchased home, quietly watering the flower bed beneath her mailbox. She wore a fitted gray t-shirt and navy blue joggers, her short-cropped curls still damp from a recent shower. Her posture was relaxed, her expression unreadable. To any casual observer, she looked like a woman simply enjoying a peaceful morning. But behind that calm demeanor was a mind like a steel trap, a former Delta Force operative, and a decorated military lawyer with a legal IQ most law professors would envy. She had moved into this neighborhood with her husband, Eric, just 3 weeks ago, under a federal relocation program offered to high-ranking military retirees. Their background had cleared every level of security, their finances were solid, their credentials unshakable, but there was one thing their paperwork couldn't filter: the silent discomfort of being the only black couple on the block. The neighborhood hadn't welcomed them. It hadn't rejected them either. It had simply watched, which is why Simone wasn't entirely surprised when the black SUV came to a sudden stop across the street, tires screeching just enough to break the illusion of normalcy. Two men stepped out. Both were white. Both wore dark blue uniforms, bearing HOA security patches, unofficial, non-governmental, and entirely unregulated. One was tall with a rigid stance, a crew cut, and mirrored sunglasses. The other was shorter, stockier, with a clipboard and a Glock holstered a bit too confidently. The taller one barked as he approached. "Ma'am, put the hose down. Hands where I can see them. You're trespassing." Simone blinked once, deliberately. She didn't flinch, didn't comply. "This is my property," she said evenly. "Who are you?" "HOA security," the tall one replied, gesturing toward his patch like it meant something. "We received a report about a suspicious person on this lot." She slowly turned off the hose, set it on the ground, and raised her hands just enough to make her point, but not enough to appear submissive. Her eyes flicked between the two men. No visible body cams, no badge numbers, no real authority. "Suspicious because I'm black?" she asked flatly. The shorter one, who had remained silent until now, chuckled. "Don't make it about that, ma'am. You're just not on our list." Simone's voice remained calm, but it carried weight now, the kind you didn't ignore. "Your list doesn't override the United States Constitution. This home is federally protected under Title 18, Section 11 and 2042. You're already trespassing, and you're armed. I'd suggest you back up." The taller one, Officer Travis, his name barely visible on a half-worn name tag, stepped closer. He clearly thought intimidation would work. "Are you a lawyer or something?" Simone's lips curved just slightly. Not a smile, more like a warning. "Actually, yes. JAG Corps, Military Law Division, 15 years. I wrote part of the current tactical engagement manual that governs non-military interaction with civilian law enforcement. So unless you want to be federally charged before lunch, I suggest you lower that weapon." But Travis wasn't convinced, or maybe he was just too proud to admit it. He waved toward the porch. Then you won't mind if we take a look around, just to verify everything checks out. Simone narrowed her gaze. You have a warrant? He hesitated, just enough to betray his bluff. No, but then you're in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Illegal search and seizure. This isn't some back alley you can bully. You're on federal property, and I know the law better than your captain. The silence that followed was the kind that only comes when a man realizes he's no longer in control. You think you're pretty smart, huh? Travis sneered. Simone crossed her arms. I think I'm smarter than someone who doesn't realize they're 3 steps into a felony. The shorter officer, Kyle, looked uneasy now. He was scanning the house, clearly searching for security cameras. Simone knew exactly what he was doing. You're being recorded, she added. Live feed. Multiple backups. Cloud encrypted. Oh, and my husband's inside on a secure line to our federal attorney as we speak. A flicker of doubt crossed Kyle's face, but Travis doubled down. We're just doing our job. No, Simone replied. You're doing someone else's dirty work, dressed up as protocol. You want to talk HOA codes? Fine, but the moment you drew that gun, this stopped being neighborhood policy and started being a civil rights violation. She took a single step forward, slow, purposeful. You want to know who I am? I'm the one they send in when negotiations fail. The one who argued constitutional limits in front of military judges while under fire in Kandahar. The one who debriefed generals on ROE violations while dodging drone strikes. I've disarmed IEDs with dental floss and duct tape. And I've done it all while people like you assumed I couldn't possibly belong where I stood. Kyle's hand dropped from his weapon. Travis wasn't so quick. His jaw clenched, but his confidence was cracking. The kind of slow, visible breakdown that happens when reality collides with delusion. You're bluffing, he said. Simone reached slowly into her back pocket, pulled out a slim leather case, and flipped it open. Inside was a Department of Defense ID, active clearance, expired just 2 weeks ago, still valid for relocation protections and legal immunity under federal statute. I don't bluff, she said. I strategize. And right now, you're playing checkers in a chess match. You're already losing. A long beat passed. Then, from the porch, Eric stepped outside, holding up a phone. Livestream's got 8,000 viewers and counting, he said calmly, including a civil rights attorney in D.C. and a local news anchor who owes me a favor. Kyle backed off immediately, both hands raised. We didn't know. No, you didn't, Simone cut in. And that's exactly the problem. You saw a black woman in a nice house and assumed threat instead of neighbor. You walked onto my lawn like you had the right to question my existence, but you picked the wrong one. She stepped forward again, until she was within a foot of Travis. His weapon was now lowered, but his hands still shook. I suggest you walk away now, Simone said, her voice ice cold, before this becomes a federal incident with your name on the front page. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned and walked back toward the SUV. Kyle followed without a word. As they drove away, Simone remained still, watching the tail lights disappear beyond the hedges. Only then did she reach down, pick up the hose, and resume watering her flowers, as if the whole encounter had just been a mild inconvenience. But deep down she knew this wasn't over, because in neighborhoods like Windermere Ridge, silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. That evening, a note appeared in their mailbox. No postage, no handwriting, just one printed line. You people don't belong here. Simone folded it in half and placed it in a file with the others. It wasn't the first. It wouldn't be the last. But it confirmed what she already knew. The incident on the lawn hadn't been spontaneous. It had been a test. The question was, who sent it? And why did they think she wouldn't pass? It started with a voicemail. A garbled male voice, low and static-laced, dropped at 3:17 a.m. while Simone slept. She didn't hear it until the next morning, when she checked her phone over a cup of black coffee, alone at the kitchen counter. You think you're safe behind that gate? Keep talking like a lawyer, and we'll see how long you last. No number, No caller ID. Just the kind of threat, wrapped in plausible deniability, that she'd heard before. Overseas, in war zones. But this was different. This was home. And that made it far more dangerous. Simone didn't flinch. She didn't run. She powered up her old field laptop and activated a tracking sequence she hadn't touched in years. Within hours, she triangulated the source of the voicemail to a phone registered to a Robert Landon, HOA board secretary, real estate broker and former city zoning official. She dug deeper. In just 2 days, she discovered something ugly. A network of security partnerships between the Windermere Ridge, HOA, and a shadowy private enforcement group known as Continental Civic Operations. No federal oversight, no accountability, just contracts, big money, and vague phrases like community risk mitigation. The men who had drawn guns on her lawn, not just self-righteous vigilantes, they were hired muscle contracted to manage undesirables under a clause buried in HOA documents labeled Lesson 9.7 Cultural Preservation Enforcement. Simone didn't rage. She documented, compiled evidence, timeline, names, voice samples. She created a file titled HOA Doctrine, Urban Segregation by Policy, and backed it up to 3 encrypted locations. And then she planned a confrontation. Not with fists, not with press conferences, but with law. A week later, the HOA held its first open meeting since the incident. Officially, it was to discuss new landscaping rules and community trash bin protocols. Unofficially, it was their attempt to reassert dominance to quietly ignore what had happened. They didn't know Simone would show up. She arrived in a dark blazer and jeans, hair pulled back, no makeup, not dressed to impress, dressed to challenge. Eric walked beside her, holding a file box, thick with printed documents, affidavits, images, and legal code. The HOA board, 5 men and 2 women, all white, all clearly uncomfortable, watched them enter like they'd just seen a courtroom materialize in the rec room of a golf club. Robert Landon stood to speak, voice cheery, rehearsed. Let's begin with item 1 on the agenda. Simone didn't let him finish. She stepped forward, dropped a bound packet of papers on the table with a sharp thud that echoed, I'm invoking the open access clause in your own bylaws. Section 12, which states that any homeowner with documented grievance may present findings directly to the board without prior scheduling. Landon blinked. Miss Carter! Perhaps this is exactly the place, and exactly the time. She turned to the room. Neighbors had gathered, mostly in silence. Some watched with arms crossed, others with subtle curiosity, but none of them spoke. On September 19th, I was unlawfully approached on my own property by 2 men wearing unauthorized tactical uniforms, carrying weapons, without cause, warrant, or consent. They claimed HOA authority. She tapped the folder. Here's proof they were contracted through an illegal security agreement orchestrated by this board. I have their personnel files, weapons registrations, and financial transfers that link directly to accounts used by Continental Civic Operations. The air thickened. Simone continued, her voice steady. This isn't just harassment, it's a violation of federal housing discrimination laws, state statutes on impersonating law enforcement, and criminal conspiracy to intimidate a protected class. Landon stood. Now wait, just a minute. No, you will sit, she said, voice cutting sharper than any gavel, or I will read your name aloud to every major civil rights organization in this state by noon. Someone gasped in the back. A woman clutched her purse tighter. No one moved. Simone placed a USB drive on the table. This contains copies of every email, memo, and surveillance still I've collected, including the ones where you discussed how to quietly encourage demographic consistency on our street. Landon's face drained of color. I have also submitted this evidence to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the U.S. Department of Justice. She glanced around the room. They will not knock first. That night, the news broke. Not nationally, not yet, but in local coverage. Veteran exposes HOA discrimination scheme, the headline read. Images showed Simone standing in front of the board with her hand resting calmly on the box of files, a portrait of poised resistance. The fallout came swiftly. Within a week, Continental Civic Operations terminated their contract with Windermere Ridge, citing legal ambiguity. Board members began stepping down. Anonymous notes stopped arriving. A few neighbors even crossed the street with casseroles and awkward apologies. But Simone knew better. The system didn't break in one blow. It bent, recoiled, tried to regenerate under new names. She'd seen it before, which is why she kept pushing. 2 weeks later, she was invited to testify in front of the State Housing Committee. There she laid out a 200-page legal framework for HOA oversight, including mandatory diversity reviews, limits on private enforcement, and clear anti-bias compliance standards. She didn't just fight back. She rewrote the rules. Falling action came not with loud applause, but with slow change. Legislation was introduced, inspired by her proposal. Journalists began investigating similar HOA structures in other neighborhoods. Law schools requested her case file for curriculum study. Civil rights lawyers reached out to collaborate. One morning, a letter arrived in her mailbox. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sentence. I saw what you did. My daughter sleeps easier now. No signature, no plea, just quiet proof that her fight mattered. Simone sat on the porch, coffee steaming beside her. Eric asleep upstairs. Windermere Ridge looked the same, but it felt different. The stares were fewer, the whispers gone. Even the kids on the block waved now, uncoached. It wasn't perfect. It was still far from equal. But it was shifting. And that shift started with a woman holding a garden hose and a mind sharper than any weapon. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to punch. She just needed the law and the clarity to wield it like a scalpel. Because sometimes, the most powerful force in a broken system isn't rage or revenge. It's intelligence, uncompromised, unrelenting, and utterly undeniable. Spring came early to Windermere Ridge that year. The trees budded faster, the air felt lighter, and for the first time since she arrived, Simone Carter didn't feel watched when she stepped outside to water the garden. The same garden where she once faced down a loaded weapon now bloomed with tulips, lined with lavender and rosemary. The roses had finally opened, unapologetically vibrant against the trimmed hedge. Change hadn't happened all at once. It rarely did, but it had happened. Slowly, steadily, unmistakably. The Department of Justice launched a formal investigation into Continental Civic Operations. Within weeks, the company was suspended from providing any services linked to residential community enforcement. Subpoenas were issued, depositions followed, and a few quietly terrified men in tailored suits began returning their campaign donations in silence. Robert Landon resigned from the HOA, citing personal health concerns, though his name would later appear in civil court filings under discrimination charges. The HOA's bylaws were reviewed and rewritten, this time with federal oversight. A new clause was introduced. No enforcement action may be taken that disproportionately targets or alienates any resident based on race, religion, or background. It was symbolic, yes, but sometimes symbols mattered. Simone didn't speak at the board meetings anymore. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. When she walked in, people sat straighter. When she raised her hand, they listened, not because they feared her, but because now they understood who she was. One morning, Eric handed her a padded envelope addressed from a local high school. Inside was a hand-drawn thank you card, signed by 20 students in a civics class. On the front was a cartoon of Simone, standing in front of a house, holding a giant law book in one hand and a shield in the other. The caption read, "Our hero didn't wear a cape, she knew the Constitution." Simone smiled, folded the card, and placed it gently in the drawer beside her medals. Later that week, she met with a group of young law students at the state university. They didn't ask her about combat or courtrooms. They asked about power, real power, the kind that can't be revoked or stripped away with a title. She told them, "You don't fight broken systems with louder voices. You fight with precision, with truth, with law sharpened like a blade. And most of all, you stay." It was that last part she emphasized, because leaving was easy. Staying took courage, especially when the walls whispered you didn't belong. One Saturday afternoon, as Simone trimmed the hedges, Jaden Harris walked up the path with a clipboard in hand. He was taller now, confident. He grinned and held out a flyer. "We're starting a community club," he said. "For kids like me, we want to call it the Porch Watchers. You know, people who stand, not because they're guarding anything, but because they refuse to be invisible." Simone read the flyer, nodded, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're already a leader, Jaden. You just needed a reason to rise." That evening, she sat on the porch as dusk rolled in. No sirens, no threats, just wind rustling through the maples and the sound of kids riding bikes down the cul-de-sac. Simone didn't see herself as a hero. She hadn't set out to be one. She had simply refused to back down when everything around her suggested she should. And in doing so, she didn't just protect herself or her family. She made space for truth, for justice, for belonging. Because sometimes the greatest revolution comes not from shouting but from standing still and making the world move around you. In a world where silence often feels safer than standing up, Simone Carter reminds us that true courage lies not in confrontation, but in conviction. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. It sometimes wears garden gloves and speaks in legal code. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." This story isn't just about race or law. It's about the quiet power of knowing your rights and refusing to back down. If you've ever felt out of place, unseen, or underestimated, remember, intelligence is not just a tool, it's a shield. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Hit that like button if you believe in standing your ground with dignity. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they challenge, inspire, and spark real conversations. Let's build a community that refuses to look away.